I was buttering toast in a quiet kitchen when a knock at the back door turned my world like a doorknob. One simple twist and everything shifted. My grandson stood there with a man I hadn't seen since the summer of '74. A man who knew my name before I spoke it. By the time the kettle clicked off, an old promise was back on my table like a folded letter, and I had to decide whether to open it. Before I begin, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'm Lon and I love knowing where you all are. Phoenix, Cincinnati, Tallahassee, spoken. Bring it on. Now let me take you into my kitchen on the kind of late afternoon that makes a window pane look like a painting. The house was breathing slow that day. You know how a home can do that. The floorboards had their old familiar sigh when I crossed them. The radio hummed like a friendly bee in the next room. And the lemon oil I'd rubbed into the cabinets earlier gave off that clean, sunny smell that always tricks me into thinking I've done more work than I have. I'm 71, which means I've learned the sacred value of quiet. Toast, tea, a crossword, and the whisper of the neighbor's maple leaves on the glass. Perfect. I spread butter edge to edge because it matters to me the way small things always have. I was doing that when the knock came. Not a soft little courtesy tap either. 3 clean knuckles, sure-footed, the kind of knock that belongs to people who know you by your first name and have permission to ask for sugar. Back door, Nana, my grandson called, voice muffled by the screen. He never says grandma. He made that little switch when he hit 6th grade and decided he needed me to sound cooler. I still answer to both. When I swung the door open, there he was, Lucas, tall as a cornsk, and already grown into the shoulders that used to be mostly backpack straps. His hair fell into his eyes the way it always has, and behind him was a man with careful posture and a weathered smile. The man wore a wool coat too nice for our little town and carried himself like he wasn't sure whether to step in or let the wind go first. "Hi, Nana," Lucas said and whispered. "Don't be mad. It's never good when a conversation starts with that." I leaned on the door frame halfway between scolding and laughing when the man behind him spoke my name. "Lon," he said, and even the way he rose at the end of my name felt familiar, like the echo of something I'd once hummed while washing dishes. It's been a long time. And there it was. The summer I worked the peach stand at McCready's orchard. The dusty bottle of grape soda. Him playing Sam Cooke on the shop radio when the boss was out back. The dance at the Veterans Hall where I wore the pale blue dress that stuck to my knees in the heat. The night my husband, then just my steady boyfriend, shook his hand and said it was good to meet a man who looked you in the eye. The name arrived like a postcard that had been on the wrong truck for 40 years. "Marcus," I said louder than I meant to. The radio in the living room seemed to lean in. He nodded, not daring to take another step. Lucas shoved his hands deep into his sweatshirt pocket and rocked on his heels like a kid who knows he did something big and has the manners to be a little scared of it. "I should have called," Marcus said. "I didn't want to startle you." "Too late," I told him. But the smile came on its own, brave as a volunteer. "Come in, both of you, before we let out all the heat I paid for. There's a particular joy in seeing a face you know you used to know. Like catching yourself in a department store mirror and realizing the coat you're wearing is your mother's." He'd softened around the edges in the way men do when they finally stopped competing with their own expectations. The hair at his temples had whitened, the kind of white that looks earned. But his eyes were the same gray-green the first remembered from the late shift at the orchard, watchful, kind, a little amused by his own seriousness. I put the kettle back on and reached for my good mugs without thinking. This is what hands do with memories. They set the table before your brain catches up. "How?" I asked, turning to Lucas. "Because teenagers are the root system of surprises." He shrugged sheepish. "You're always telling me to use the internet for something good," he said. "I was doing that family history assignment, and your high school yearbook popped up. There was a photo of the peach stand. Then I found a community board and there was a post about Mr. Marcus giving a talk at the library about renovating old houses, and a bunch of old comments that mention your name with his like no big deal." He glanced at Marcus. "I DM'd him. I said I was your grandson. If that's okay." "If it wasn't okay, you wouldn't be standing here," I told him and touched his jacket sleeve. "But maybe knock like you're carrying glass next time." "I did," he said, deadpan, and we all laughed, the relieved, silly laugh of people who just pulled something off without breaking any furniture. When we sat, Marcus didn't drink his tea right away. He warmed his hands on the mug the way I used to see him wrap his fingers around a thermos during those orchard mornings, when the fog came up so thick it felt like wool on the lungs. I came back to town last winter, he said. My sister's here now. I do restoration work. Old floors, porches that got tired of holding everyone up. I meant to look you up, Lon. I did. I didn't know if you'd want to see me. After all this time, I tried to keep my voice easy. You were a friend. A good one, he said softly. He looked down and cowered for a while. That word landed between us like a coin thrown into a well. You hear the drop for a long time. Lucas took the hint and stood. I promised Ma'd pick up groceries, he said. He put a folded paper bag on the counter. Apples, a jar of honey, 2 good tomatoes. He always brings something when he comes. Afraid I'll pretend I don't need it. I'll come back later to make sure everything's okay. Everything's okay, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure in what direction the okay would take us. He hugged me quick and left a draft in his place. Then it was just me and Marcus and the quiet hum of the house listening, as houses do. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out an envelope. No fancy seal, no return address, just my name. Lon, his handwriting was the same. Square, neat, as if his letters had been taught to stand up straight and recite their names properly. I kept this too long, he said. Your husband gave it to me to pass along if I ever found my courage. He asked me to deliver it after. Well, you know when, he swallowed. I didn't do it. Then life turned into a series of reasons, none of them decent. My husband's name is one I can say out loud now without bracing myself. There was a time when speaking it felt like stepping barefooted onto a stone floor in winter. Today it was just a good name belonging to a good man who lived a full story with me until his last sentence. I took the envelope. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. He wanted me to read it to you, I asked. He left it for you, Marcus said. He told me it was about a promise he'd broken, and an apology he never gave properly. He said. Marcus exhaled hard and looked at the ceiling like a man who doesn't trust his eyes not to embarrass him. He said I would know when the moment was right and you would decide what to do with it. I turned the envelope over. It had been opened and resealed once. I raised an eyebrow and Marcus shook his head. I didn't read it, he said. I opened it years ago in a weak moment and saw the first line. Lon, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of nerve before I ran out of time. And I sealed it again and lived with that one sentence bouncing around the inside of my life. That's my confession. I'm sorry. There it was. The unexpected part. Not fireworks, not melodrama. Just the gentle, colossal shock of a new door opening inside a house you thought you knew by heart. A letter from the man I loved, delivered by the friend who had vanished without a forwarding address. Felt like a second chance wrapped in paper. Do you want me to go? Marcus asked. You don't owe me the spectacle of your feelings. I looked at him a long moment. He held my gaze, patient, respectful, ready to do whatever I asked, including walk out and never knock again. There's a particular dignity in offering someone that choice without trying to steer it. Stay, I said. But give me a minute. He nodded and folded his hands like a churchgoer. I slipped the envelope with the butter knife because it seemed fitting, and I pulled out the letter. The paper had yellowed into that soft cream that makes you want to touch it with clean hands. My husband's handwriting rushed across it. Familiar loops and stubborn angles. I read the first paragraph silently, and the kitchen felt smaller, not with suffocation but with closeness, like two people stepping into a photograph frame at the same time. I won't tell you the whole of that first paragraph yet. Some things deserve to ripen on the branch, but I will tell you this. It was an apology with the kind of honesty that can only be written by a man who knows there's no time left for performance. He said he'd leaned too hard on certainty when what we needed was curiosity. He said he judged a friend unfairly for holding a mirror up to him rather than a cheerleading sign. He said he had asked that friend to go, and then when pride dulled into regret, he didn't know how to ask him back. I set the letter down and looked at Marcus, and in that moment I understood the years all at once. The summer of '74 wasn't the neat little story I had put in a box and labeled youth. It was a beginning that had gotten interrupted not by romance or scandal, but by that quieter wrecking ball misunderstanding. May I? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the letter like a man asking permission to handle an heirloom. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. This is mine to carry first. I folded the paper carefully and pressed the crease the way I used to fold notes into my boyfriend's jacket pocket. As if love could be packed efficiently when handled with care. We didn't rush to fill the air. He told me about restoring a porch in winter. The way wood speaks differently when the cold climbs into it. I told him about the way my husband used to fall asleep during baseball games and insist he wasn't sleeping. He smiled at that, tender and undulous. There was no performance in him. No victory lap at being let back into a story that had moved on without him. Only a patient presence, the kind that says, I know the value of being asked to stay. When the kettle hissed for more water, he was up before I was, reaching for it by instinct, and I felt something simple and astonishing. Relief. Not the high-drama kind, just the deep barefoot kind, the feeling of someone else knowing where the mugs live without being told. You always kept them in the second cabinet, he said, and then stopped as if he'd overstepped. I waved him on and he set 2 cups on the counter side by side. We stood there, 2 old people who had once been young, and let the quiet complete a sentence neither of us needed to speak. My grandson's apples waited in their paper bag like little shining moons. The late sun met the sink and turned the soap bubbles to sequins. The maples rattled their last green coins of the season at the window. And that letter sat between us, heavy as a Bible, simple as a grocery list. This can go a few different ways, I said finally. I'll match your pace, he said. If that's all right. It is, I said, and it was because consent isn't just for the young or the dramatic. It's for any moment when the heart wants to cross a threshold, and has the good sense to ask if the other heart is ready. He put on his coat when the shadows climbed the walls, and he paused at the door, hacked in hand, an old-fashioned gesture that made me strangely happy. May I come by tomorrow? He asked. I could look at that back step. It wobbles like a loose tooth. You always did hate loose things, I said. Come by, we'll see about the step and the rest. He tipped an imaginary cap. His humor was always quiet like that, and then he was gone, leaving the faintest trace of winter air behind him. I sat with my tea and my letter, and the kind of tired that isn't really tired at all, just the body telling you it did a lot of feeling in an afternoon. I traced the crease of the envelope one more time, and tucked it into the drawer where I keep my favorite recipes. Not to hide it, but to place it among the instructions that have fed me. If you're listening from Omaha or Raleigh or Bakersfield, or a place that isn't even a dot on most maps, you know this part by heart. Life is long and short at the same time. People go and sometimes they circle back carrying words that took them half a lifetime to learn how to say. Doors you thought were painted shut open with an ordinary knock. And sometimes a grandson with too long hair uses the internet to do the decent brave thing. Tomorrow Marcus will come back with his toolbox and I'll put out 2 mugs without asking myself whether that's presumptuous. The letter will still be mine to open all the way. And the apology inside will do what apologies are supposed to do, not erase anything, but illuminate it so it can be handled without shards. That's where I'll leave you for now. A clean counter, a humming kettle, an old song drifting in from a radio in the next room, and me Lon standing at the edge of a new hallway where the lights have just flickered on. The night after Marcus left, the house did not sleep in its usual way. My kettle's whistle seemed louder. The refrigerator hummed in an almost impatient tone, and even the wind that slid along the siding had a restless edge. I tucked the letter under my pillow like a child with a secret toy, and drifted between shallow dreams and half-memories. When morning arrived, I woke not with grogginess, but with a sense of anticipation, as though the day itself had questions waiting at the door. I moved slowly, careful with my joints, but my heart had its own brisk pace. The kitchen was already bright with the slanted kind of light that finds every scratch in a countertop. I made coffee strong enough to remind me I was alive. The letter sat on the table beside my mug, and though I'd read only the beginning, I felt as if it pulled at me, insisting on being finished. My hands lingered on the edges, tracing the paper as if my husband's presence were pressed into its fibers. Before I dared unfold it again, there came another knock at the back door, softer this time, deliberate. Marcus stood there, toolbox in one hand, a paper bag in the other. His coat collar was turned up against the morning chill. He looked both certain and tentative, like a man who has practiced knocking in his head before doing it for real. I brought muffins, he said. Blueberry, and I thought I'd see about that loose step. You remembered I like blueberries, I replied. Come in before they get cold. He entered as though he had never left. His movements weren't forced. They had the comfort of someone who knew where to place his shoes, where to set the bag. Yet every action carried a hint of reverence, as if he were afraid of stepping too hard on sacred ground. We shared the muffins first. Crumbs scattered across the table between us, and neither of us hurried to brush them away. The silence was not awkward. It was filled with the weight of two lives circling back, cautiously overlapping. Finally, I slid the letter toward him. I'd read more this morning, I said. You were right. It was about promises. Promises kept and some broken, but also forgiveness. He wrote that if you and I ever crossed paths again, I should listen with the same patience I once offered him. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. He was always braver than me, even in his honesty. I shook my head gently. Bravery takes different shapes. Sometimes it's standing still when running would be easier. For a while we spoke of the past, not as if we were prying open wounds, but as if we were walking through a field, pointing out where the stones once tripped us. He told me of the years he spent restoring porches and staircases, of nights he slept under unfinished rafters, because work had become both punishment and sanctuary. I told him of the family dinners I kept alive after my husband passed, of birthdays and graduations, where I wore my best dress to make sure a memory had color to cling to. When the air grew too thick with remembrance, we turned to the practical. Marcus set his toolbox by the back door and crouched to inspect the wobbly step. His hands were steady, deliberate, the kind of hands that know how to respect wood grain and rusted nails. I stood nearby, leaning on the doorframe, watching the man he had become do something so ordinary that it felt extraordinary. The sound of his hammer echoed into the morning air, each strike sealing something between us. After an hour, the step was solid again. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me, not with triumph but with a quiet offering. That should hold you, he said. I smiled. It already has. He stayed for lunch. We made soup together. Vegetable with too much garlic, the way I like it. At one point, our hands brushed as we both reached for the ladle. It was nothing really, but it was also everything. Neither of us pulled away. The warmth of that brief touch stayed longer than it had any right to. When Lucas arrived later, he found us sitting at the table, bowls empty, laughter still hanging in the air. He raised his eyebrows but said nothing, only grinning the mischievous grin of youth that knows when something important is unfolding. You two look like you've solved the world's problems, he teased. Just a step, Marcus said, but his glance at me told a different story. That evening, after they both left, I sat with the letter once more. The words no longer felt heavy. They felt like a bridge, one my husband had built from the other side. So Marcus and I could meet in the middle without guilt. The letter wasn't about reopening the past. It was about giving permission to live fully in the present. I tucked it back into the drawer alongside the recipes that feed my body. This letter would feed something else, my courage to welcome connection again. Life at 71 doesn't offer endless tomorrows, but it does offer today. And sometimes today comes with a knock at the kitchen door, and the steady hands of someone you once thought lost forever. And so with a repaired step, a letter folded neat and a heart unexpectedly light. I knew this love in its truest form doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes back as steady as a hammer's rhythm, as gentle as a hand brushing yours, and as real as the taste of blueberry muffins shared on an ordinary morning.